Alright, well we just finished covering the Golden Age. There's 3.0 through 3.2 done. Next up is the 4.0, should be pretty simple. How many of those are there again? Oh no. Ah yes, the 4.0s, back when Nintendo gave us a balance patch like every single month. And this is also the time where we got all the Kensa collection, all the Sheldon's picks, Booyah Bomb, Ultra Stamp, Torpedo, and Fizzy Bomb. There's a lot to cover, so let's get started. Since we covered 4.0 in the previous part, we're gonna jump straight to 4.1, released on October 2nd, 2018. This patch had a lot of minor buffs, but some interesting major ones. The 96 got flat out extra range, which was pretty significant for them. Undercover got more reliable damage to hit 40 more easily, Splash Wall had ink recovering faster, 10 missiles got fired faster, but most importantly, Nautilus got its shot speed increased by 133%. This is basically when Nautilus became good, but without the gold Nautilus kit or many people giving it attention, it wouldn't even pop up into the meta until much later. On points for special, the main things to note is that both the Splat Charger, Firefin, and End Parries continued to get nerfs in the points for special department. This would kind of hurt End Parry's inkjet output, but Firefin and Charger have not received their paint nerf yet, so they were still insanely good at outputting Ray and Bomb Rush. This update would also introduce new content in the form of the absolutely broken Fizzy Bomb, the absolutely underpowered Booyah Bomb, and the K-Pro and K-Machine. K-Pro would be significant later when they added MPU, but K-Machine would be the main weapon to take advantage of Fizzy Bomb. Staple weapons like the Dualies and Chargers would get a little bit weaker, but it wouldn't really change too much, and people were also a bit new at experimenting with how exactly you could abuse Fizzy Bomb, so the meta didn't really change too much between 4.1 and 4.0. 4.2 was released shortly after on November 6, 2018, and it also wouldn't change too much. It did, however, plant the seeds for shooter buffs that would really start to take effect later into the game's life cycle. This one decreasing the end lag for all shooters and Squeezer. Pretty drastic. Ink Brush would get a bit of extra painting range, which would be important later, and Tri-Slosher would become light class from medium, giving it effectively 2 extra subs of swim and run speed on it at all times. Beacon would get the ability to have 2 people jump to one of them, something that would become very important in a patch later. And points for special wise would again be minor changes. Tenebrella and H3D getting some slaps on the wrist, as well as Charger getting another points for special increase to help deal with the Ray output. This patch introduced Ultra Stamp, which like Booyah was way too weak at launch to be notable, but it would also introduce Torpedo, which was really strong at the time, as well as Kensa Jr. and Kunder, which, while it would take a little bit of time for people to get used to, by next patch both of them would be devastating. Alright, so with the lackluster patches out of the way, 4.3 comes in on December 4th, 2018, and oh boy, this is probably the most drastic patch Splatoon has had since the 1.0s. Before we get into the additions, Mini, Heavy, and Hydra got better buffs from the run speed effect, which is a good change that they needed. They finally fixed Splat Charger and Firefin, lowering their paint output, though they didn't adjust their points for special back for some reason. Tent and Sorella 10 had their durability of the shield lessened, though they made the shield launch do a bit more damage to compensate, which was another great change. Fizzy Bomb got toned down as people started to realize that Double Fizzy was absolutely broken at stalling the zone, in this case Sub-Saver being decreased in its effectiveness and the ink recovery taking longer to start. Which, while it was helpful, did not tone down Fizzy nearly enough, and it would still be used to stall objectives or control space. Splashdown got better damage to objects, mainly the Brella Shield and Ballers. Baller also got increased damage to Brella Shields. They made Ultra Stamp a bit more of a functioning special by allowing the swings to happen much faster. While it still struggles to block shots, this would make it an actual usable special. And they also made it easier to turn or rotate. Ray finally got some significant tone backs, again something that's been lacking for a bit, though it was not major enough. It mostly just made specials like Ink Armor or Baller more prevalent against it. It would not be the last time this special got nerfed. And then randomly, they decreased Inkjet's damage to Baller. I don't know why, but they did. Swim speed got adjusted on heavy weapons, so it stacks better at lower quantities, which is awesome. And they buffed ink resistance to help avoid taking damage by stepping into enemy ink, making 0.1 or 0.2 ink res really common. Though they did this because they introduced something we'll get to in a tiny bit. Finally, on the points for special, some minor nerfs to the Splat Brella and Kensa Jr., K Jr. mainly for its torpedo bubble potential, and Brella because it's very prevalent. This patch also introduced the most amount of strong new weapon kits, including the custom Explosher, being really useful over the normal one because Baller could be used to live Ray, Ballpoint Nuvo having Beacon and Rain, Blah Blah Deco, Nautilus 79, Kensa 52, and Kensa Rapid Blaster. But most importantly, this patch introduced Main power-up. Main power-up is so drastic because it gives a crazy buff to every single weapon class, which would be okay if the main power-up effects were all reasonable, but unfortunately just one of them wasn't. Damage up. Kensa Pro with MPU, Dualies with MPU, Dualie Squelchers, Ballpoint, Bamboo, Hydra. There were so many weapons that got drastically overbuffed in the most stupid way just by the addition of this one ability. And at the time, it didn't require as strong main power quantities as it would in future. I truly believe this patch is where things really started to go downhill. Sure, some things were a bit unreasonable, like how they handled nerfing Charger and Dualies, but nothing was really game-breaking. This patch would introduce so many problems that I believe patches from here really struggled to keep up with how exactly to fix them. The best weapon of this patch would be Ballpoint. Like, it's not even close. Even on Ballpoint's release, there were pro players calling out how insanely good it would be, but now with the addition of main power-up alongside Ballpoint's old damage means both the short and long range modes could 3-shot you, on top of not having all the nerfs that are going to come to it over the next few patches. Ballpoint, even to this day, is known as a jack-of-all-trades backline, but back then it was the master of all trades. Even after Ballpoint's damage would eventually get reduced, you would still see 2 of them in team comps. Armor support started to become more and more of an essential role at this time, with the H3 and Kensa Undercover being the main picks. H3 just got buffed with a brand new main power-up effect, giving it an ability to 2-shot, while Kensa Undercover Umbrella had extremely broken torpedoes that would do a ton of damage and was only 1 ADP for ink armor. As Charger's points for special rose, as well as a lowered painting capability, we saw more custom jet squelchers in the backline for that ray output, especially with how absurd Stingray was at this time. In the aggressive weapon category, we saw a good bit of Kensa machines. Even with the nerf to fizzy bombs, it was still incredibly strong, especially at dealing with some of these MPU damage up weapons. And we even got to see the resurgence of Dualies with the Kensa Dualie kit, especially since you only needed a very low amount of main power up to become a 3-shot. You might be expecting version 4.4 to be next, but nope, 2 weeks later, version 4.3 released, being a patch to almost exclusively focus on main power-up fixes. Oh boy. A lot of weapons would get slight improvements to their main power-up effects, some being really notable, like the E-Leader getting a little bit more range, or Mini Spotling getting a bit longer of a charge that it can get, Undercover being able to have a better curve, so the shield comes back a little bit faster, but mainly, this is here to fix MPU damage up. We would now be preventing Hydra from being able to get 33.3 damage without a full charge. Ballpoint would require more MPU to get 33.3, though you would still be able to do it, and they even nerfed the run speed effect on it because Ballpoint was that bad. Dualies would now require more gear to get 33.3. Both Fizzy Bomb and Torpedo would be nerfed, Torpedo fixing the insane damage it had and making it cost more ink, and Fizzy Bomb decreasing the paint output it provided. Finally, in this patch, they also nerfed Bubble Blower because it used to be a little bit too big, so the bubble combo that it's still infamous for today used to be even stronger, and they would make Ballpoint, Blob, and for some reason Hydra an additional 10 points for special. Welcome to patch 4.4.0, aka damage control. Remember those shooter and lag buffs we just gave 2 patches ago? Well, now we're gonna pair it with a bunch of startup lag ones too. Hopefully this doesn't end up being something more drastic one day. Squiffer and E-Leader would both get added main power-up effects, allowing them to turf better, which would be really important for both of these weapons. For Ballpoint Splatling, Nintendo straight up removed its ability to 3-shot with MPU. It was that bad, making its short-range mode do 28 damage and its long-range mode do 30 damage. It would not stop the Ballpoint meta though. Both Splat Dualies and Tetra Dualies would get a slightly smaller hitbox, which is something that they adjusted in an earlier patch, making it easier to hit people with Dualies. So it's just really a revert, but it's another really odd one. Specials is where this patch would really be drastic. Outside of the small missile buff making them a little bit faster, Booyah Bomb and Ultra Stamp would become actual functioning special weapons, Booyah Bomb being a little bit overbuffed and Ultra Stamp not really being too overbuffed, finally settling into a place of being somewhat useful. Additionally, Ink Resistance would be buffed as a way to help counter MPU damage up, allowing a little bit of Ink Res to give you more immunity before you started taking damage, which would be a little bit helpful. Most of the top picks at this patch would receive slight nerfs, which wouldn't really change things. Machine would still be really popular, H3 would still be really popular, Expo would still be really good in zones, but Ballpoint was the second weapon in Splatoon 2's history to get to 230 points for special, with Tenatech being the only other exception. And like with T-Tech, This would end up being a mistake that would be toned down later. 4.4 would be a tamer version of 4.3 for the most part, but there would be two new faces. Bamboo would be seeing a bit more use for its ability to shred objects and people slowly realizing you could one-shot. But more importantly, now that Booyah Bomb was an actual special, Kenta Splattershot Pro became the ultimate dually counter, completely pushing Kenta dualies out of the meta slowly, having a high Booyah output at only 180p, and not relying on that much gear at this time. Patch 4.5 would come up next and be another strange one. Once again, we're getting more shooter buffs. Spray shooters would get the ability to recover ink faster, even though all of them are already very ink efficient. 52 and 96 would get increased damage to objects, which makes somewhat sense. Luna Blaster getting the same damage to object increase. Rapid main power would now allow its radius to be slightly larger, which would be pretty important for it later on. All rollers, except Dynamo, would get increased damage to Brella shields as well. Tri-Slasher would get a bit more range on the center shot, but the main buff of this patch would be Mini Spotling. You could now jump a bit higher when you fully charge the Spotling, giving it some new options, and it was able to run a bit faster both while charging and firing. There were also some pretty substantial nerfs. H3 required more gear in order to use main power-up effectively. Bamboo's ultimately ridiculous damage to objects would be toned down, though this would still be a crazy strength of the weapon as long as you are running that main power-up. Machine would consume more ink and have a slightly smaller radius, which is good because it was a really extreme hitbox at the time. And Explosher would finally get its big zones nerf, reducing the splash damage radius, but more importantly, reducing the ink efficiency by 30%. You used to have around 12 sloshes on this weapon, and now it's around 8, which is much more fair. Fizzy Bomb would get nerfed again, decreasing the damage radius this time for the second and third explosion. Inkstorm would get its effect radius decreased, meaning it was a little bit smaller, but it would paint a tiny bit better in that area. Another little indirect nerf to Ballpoint. They buffed Bomb Defense DX's effects against Point Sensor. I don't know why they did this. Poor Point Sensor, bro. I feel bad. On the nerf side of things, Kenta Splattershot Pro would get its first tone down, being an additional 20 points for Booyah. H3 would get to 20, even though it was starting to fall off. And both Custom Explosher, which was fair, and Custom Hydra, again for some reason, would get an additional 10 points for special. The main thing to change from this patch was the armor support. There would still be a lot of Kunder, but H3 would slowly start to fall off and be replaced by NZAP. But because NZAP was still 210p and Last Stitch wasn't super buffed yet, it wasn't really that strong an option as it is today. Despite the points for special nerfs, Splattershot Pro would still be really common and if anything would remain a staple for a bit longer. However, Mini would be the main winner of this patch. Missiles aren't the insane thing they are today, but they're still pretty good, and with only 190p, Mini would be able to output them easily, so this increased mobility and ability to jump gave it a lot more options in fights. Throughout the 4.0s, while Brella and Tenebrella had gotten slight indirect nerfs, mainly making other weapons stronger against it, both would still be pretty good picks. The regular Brella would struggle a bit with the ballpoint, as the amount of walling out potential it put meant it was a bit difficult to shield it head on. We're only halfway through the 4.0s, and already the meta has gone into a very different and more strict spot than it was during the 3.0s. Some new things that they added were nice, a lot of the main weapon buffs to things like Mini Spotling were cool, and even Ballpoint was pretty fun as an extremely good weapon, but as a whole, a lot of the game's balance was kind of thrown out the window to add new things, and a lot of stuff didn't feel like it had proper testing, especially main power damage up. However, there's still more 4.0s to go, mainly 4.6, 4.7, 4.8, 4.9, and 5.0. So this video is going to be split into two parts, and I hope you'll look forward to part 2.